joy there. And you get to take pictures, that's fun. I always tell the adopted couple, they're paying me to take pictures of the judge. It's a good time. Okay, so here's some of the steps that we go through. This is not an all-inclusive list, but it kind of help you get through the process of what occurs here. Okay, so in a private adoption, attorneys are so necessary before the birth of the child, okay? So we actually have to file a petition with the court before the child is born. And in this petition, we state who the birth mother is. And what we do is we say, the child is, hey Justin. The child is anticipated to be born on such and such day, okay? We list who we think the birth father is, and then we list, hey, the relinquishments are anticipated to be taken on this day. We do all of that ahead of time. And then after the birth, we have to amend the petition to include the actual date of the birth and everything that occurred. But before, so we get the court case, we do all of this ahead of time. Okay, and then we file this a motion to appoint. This is what I talked about earlier about the caseworker. We file a motion to appoint a caseworker to take the relinquishment. And this we have to put the resume, basically, of the caseworker. Why is this caseworker suited to take a relinquishment of a birth mother? What experience do they have? And that's where we get the motion and the memo to do. This, we usually try to do this a month before the due date, because so often, especially with the first pregnancy, many of you know this, children come early. They're excited. This gives us time. This way we don't have to call the judge and say, hey, Your Honor, we really need this yesterday. But this can be done after on a private adoption. It's easiest to do it beforehand. Now, the one thing I tell my adopted couples though is you are out the if the birth mother changes her mind and does not want to go through with the adoption, you're out the money for the filing fee and the time that we put in to doing that. Okay. So then 24 hours after, oh yeah.
Sorry, I had a question on that. So when you're doing the adoptions and the adoptive parents are paying for the medical expenses of the birth mom and all that, do they lose out on that, or is there any kind of a safety net there?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
And different firms handle that in different ways too.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them will actually bring it into the firm, and then the firm pays it out.
Mm-hmm.
We don't. It's just extra work. Sometimes the adopted couple will just pay the medical expenses directly.
Okay.
One thing, to that point about expenses, one thing adopted couples really shouldn't do is just pay the birth mother cash. They should actually be, it's just like anything, keep receipts, because you'll need those for taxes and other things. So, but yeah, what you have to really watch is, especially that where they change their mind, is you don't want it to look like you're buying a baby. And you're taking care of the birth mother in all of her needs at that. So, okay, so after the birth of the child, no sooner than 24 hours, that's when you can do the voluntary relinquishment. At that time also, she does the placement agreement, and there's a form, the non-identifying health history for birth mother and birth father. You can actually have those filled out ahead of time, but all of that needs to be done within that kind of time frame. All right, at any time you can get the birth father's voluntary relinquishment. Okay, so then after the child is born, you need to file the report of relinquishments to the Office of Vital Statistics. It's a half-page document. What it states is that it has the birth mother's name, it has when the relinquishment was taken, who took the relinquishment, and which attorney was involved in the process. And then, you can also file the request for a hearing, okay? So you do have it, after the placement of the child, the law says that you cannot finalize an adoption until 6 months after the placement of a child, okay? But actually, the law is a little different. It actually says 6 months that the child, the child has to be in the home of the adopted couple for 6 months, okay? Which is really weird. So if a child's in the hospital for 2 weeks, they're officially not in the home of the adoptive couple. So in our wording, we never use the word in the home. We always use the word placement. The placement took place on X day, and that's the day we count as being in the home. And we've never, using that language, the judges never question us. If you use the word they were in the home, you've got to make sure that you're always spread that out the 6 months from the date that the child is actually in the home. So, yeah, so the request for hearing, that can be done. Some of the judges again are all different. You just have to kind of you play the game. Some judges will not allow you to request a hearing until you have filed all of this information, okay? Other judges will let you do that, especially sometimes you just have to call the clerk and say, hey, look, this adopted couple has family coming in, they really want to know the date. Some have religious ceremonies after that they want to take care of, and they really want to get the date set. But some of this information you won't have until a couple weeks before finalization. So it's just working with the judge on when you can actually get a hearing set. But some of the things you do need, the criminal background checks, they actually need that in their home study ahead of time. It's worth updating that as soon as placement occurs, because there are judges that want criminal background checks within the last 6 months. So usually at placement, around that time, we go ahead and update criminal backgrounds also to make sure that we don't have any problems with finalization. So. Okay, real quick, an agency adoption. Okay, an agency adoption is actually fairly simple for most attorneys. Everything that's pre-birth and 24 hours after the birth, generally agencies handle all of that information. They take care of all of that. Yeah.
Going back to the criminal history reports, what would be some of the disqualifying, and obviously child abuse, things like that, but, you know, felony or?
That's about it.
Is that about it?
Yeah. I don't know, it's kind of an interesting world we live in. Anybody can have sex and have a baby, but not everybody can adopt a child. But very few times you're really looking at the child abuse, and that's the big one, child trafficking, that kind of stuff.
Do they go back do juvenile records
No.
appear in this?
No, it's just, you're looking at a child abuse here in Utah, you're looking at that, and then you run an FBI background check, see what kind of things are.
I heard that it's really hard to adopt Native American children.
Yes.
Is it because the tribe, I don't understand. I always try the tribal law.
Let me come right back to that, okay? Let me just, because that's actually one of the things I'll talk about, but yes, it is.
The home study report and the supervisory visits, how many visits do you usually have to?
The law requires one post supervisory after the placement of the child. Most agencies want you to do at least 3 post placement, okay? And then there's the pre-supervision. The caseworkers have all of this that they go through and can fill out the home study. So it's the same as like for foster care, all those kind of, it's basically the same home study.
Thank you.
Okay, so real quick on the agency adoption, they take care of all that. The difference between an agency and a private adoption, the agency maintains legal custody of the child until finalization. That's why they need to consent to the adoption. Whereas with a private adoption, you're giving legal and physical custody to the adoptive parents until finalization, okay? Post-placement, basically the same. ICPC, know that it's out there. I'm not gonna spend time going through this. This is the Interstate Compact of Placement of Children. You do need to have attorneys in both states. Here's what happens is, here's how this kind of works. Say your birth mother's in Utah, adopted couple in Idaho, okay? You have to file ICPC documents with the state of Utah saying, hey, Utah, we've got a child that was born in Utah. We want to send this child to Idaho for an adoption. And Utah comes back and says, they look at all the documentation and they say, okay. And then they send it back to the attorney. Then the attorney has to send all that documentation to Idaho. They say, Idaho, Utah has approved this child to come to Idaho for an adoption. Will you accept this child? And then Idaho goes through all the documentation and says, yes, we will accept it. And at that time, now the child can leave the state of Utah, okay? Other states are not so quick. Had a couple that was in Texas for almost 30 days. That child could not leave the state of Texas until both Texas and Utah had approved. So hopefully they have family. Okay, Indian Child Welfare Act. You need to know if a child, this is why we do the health history, okay? We have to know the kind of the history of the birth mother and the birth father to know where are they as far as genetically. If they do have Native American blood, or they're eligible to be a member of a tribe, then jurisdiction now sits with the tribe. And to your point about it is very difficult, yes, it is extremely difficult. Generally the tribes, and I know this like the Navajo tribe locally, if you are not Navajo, they don't want you adopting a Navajo child. It becomes a lot more difficult to do that. Some of the tribes, if the child would not be eligible to be a member of the tribe because the blood is, it's less than a quarter or less than, each tribe has their own different thing that they look at. If they're not eligible to be a tribe, then what that tribe will say is, we do not want jurisdiction over this child, and then you could just proceed as normal. So it's one of those interesting things, but it's all jurisdictional. So. Yeah, any other questions on that? Or okay, grandparents' rights, there are none. So if your child, if grandma and grandpa, your child gets pregnant, and you're like, oh, I want to maintain my rights as grandma and grandpa. Yeah, good luck. There, you have zero rights when it comes to that. So.
Idaho has it now, don't they?
I don't.
I had a niece that, my in-laws adopted their granddaughter.
Okay. Now, sometimes parents can say, hey, we want to be the ones to adopt, and that's great. And then they're put in the same situation. But if you as grandma said, I want to be grandma, and daughter says, no, I want them to be parents, you don't have any rights there. And that's similar in most states.
So that's not saying then that the grandparents would, in court, they can apply for adoption of the child and be considered just like anybody else?
Not in a private adoption. That would be more for foster care type stuff. In foster care, absolutely, grandparents have a little more rights, because in foster care, some of their, what they want is DCFS is in charge. One of their things is if the parents cannot take the children, they look for a close family relative to take the child. And that's when grandparents can come in. But in just a private or an agency adoption, no, if you petitioned, nothing would happen of it. Because it's all the choice of the birth mother at that point. So.
What do you think about, we've got a situation in our family that's kind of interesting. My sister-in-law has been a foster parent for 35 years, and she has adopted 18
Wow.
of her foster children. And she adopts them when they're 18 because they and it's called a family completion adoption.
Yeah, it's basically an adult adoption at that point.
Do you really think that the caseworkers think that this is psychologically beneficial for the child, or?
I've seen some situations that are incredible on that. That's actually a very positive situation. And think about that for like even intestacy, inheritances.
I know.
Now, because they've spent time with this foster care family,
They can inherit.
they can inherit from that foster care, and they are now tied into that family who has, in essence, raised them for a time. And it's their choice. Nobody's forcing them to do it.
Right.
So I think it's a great.
Well, it's just kind of interesting, because every time we go to see them, their family's grown. I never can keep track of how many nieces and nephews I have.
That's awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
What about trying to adopt a child of your same-sex partner?
Yes. I actually had that on the. Utah is very interesting on this still. Okay. The laws still say man and woman. It does, but the judges have been accepting them. Okay. It's a growing area, but it does occur quite regularly. So, because in Utah you can now even do single parent adoptions from foster care and you can do same-sex adoptions through foster care. All of that is possible too. So I did talked a lot of mainly the older traditional adoptions with birth fathers, but yes, same-sex couples can occur there too, and there are different things that there's surrogacy agreements ahead of time that you can get into, some stuff that I don't necessarily deal with. Good question.
Can some of these consents or relinquishments and so on be done electronically? So no facsimile,
No.
email, so it all has to be like your snail mail and certified mail?
Well, you can scan it in after the fact, because you still send everything to the court electronically. So yeah, once you have it, but you should maintain that physical copy. So.
Is there a requirement for how long you have to maintain the physical copies in the attorney's office?
Until the finalization, at minimum. And then after that, you can scan it and just have that put away that way too. Okay, well, any other questions? Well, thank you. If you do have, if you're getting into it, you have the opportunity to do an adoption, you want to run through it, that's my email address. Feel free, Meredith. Happy to walk you through some of the processes also. Happy to share forms if you'd like a form. That, again, always looking for positive experiences with adoption, so anything we can do to help out, make it easier for people to do it. Thank you for this opportunity.